Welcome to the Preserving Family Podcast. The purpose of this podcast is to equip you to gain insight, information, and inspiration to help you protect, teach, and guide your family during these turbulent times. Our goal is to provide tools and resources to help you strengthen and preserve your own marriages and families. Now here are your hosts, Dr. Mark and Janie Ogletree.
Everyone, welcome to our Preserving Families podcast. We're so grateful you're with us, thankful for our listeners. A reminder that you can always share this podcast with someone. We are on iTunes, we're on Spotify, we're on our website at preservingfamilies.org, and now we're on YouTube. And so once again, feel free to share that. A reminder of our church history trip that's filling up pretty quickly. But we still have a few spots for our August 6th through 11th trip. We'd love for you to come with us. We have a lot of fun on these things. That's August 6th to the 11th, but we're trying to close our signups here in the next couple of months. I am talking today about our youth. And, we could talk about young men. We could talk about young women. In fact, one day I hope to do a podcast episode. We hope to do a podcast episode on raising girls. But today our focus is going to be on raising boys, on bringing up boys and young men. Some of you may think, if you know us, what's a guy that has 7 daughters doing talking about raising sons? Well, we have one son and he is all boy. I think that qualifies me to some degree. Also have just spent my whole life with our young men pretty much, whether it be coaching them or working with them in our church programs. Have always loved the youth of the church and have had a special connection to our young men. In fact, my doctoral dissertation, it didn't take long for me to decide what topic I wanted to bust into. I wanted to get into the relationship between fathers and sons, which is what I worked on. Just about a year ago, and we'll call your attention to this, we try not to do this too much, but I did publish a book called The Making of a Man, A Guide to Raising Strong, Resilient Sons. That book is on Amazon. I don't think it's out of print yet, but a lot of the things that we're going to talk about today are in that book, The Making of a Man, A Guide to Raising Strong, Resilient Sons. So there you go. It's at Amazon. So let's just talk for a minute. I'm going to set the table here because we're going to have a special guest here in a few minutes, but I want to just set the table for some things that are going on. We see more and more of our youth today that are not thriving, especially as they transition into single adulthood. In fact, in one study, 1/3 of single young men today live at home with their parents. That's a 100% increase in the past 20 years. In fact, one woman in an article quipped that today's men are more like the kids that we babysat rather than the dads who drove us home. Well, we know that there's all kinds of ramifications of that and all kinds of implications and applications. And we know that some of the things we're going to talk about today, these are not universally true. I don't want anyone to hear what we're talking about and take offense, because there's a lot of great young men out there. There's a lot of great boys. There's a lot of great parents. But there is a growing concern in our country that men are becoming less ambitious, less responsible, less mature, especially when compared to women and what women are accomplishing today. If you think, well, this doesn't really apply to those who are members of the church, guess what? Elder Christofferson has spoken twice now in general conference expressing his concern about boys, about young men. And so once again, I'm sharing some things about men and young single men, but boys become men. I mean, that's why this is such an important area of focus for us. There was a White House report from the White House Council on Boys and Men that came out a few years ago. And they shared some interesting data. They said that basically American boys seem to be directionless, while an abundance of girls seem to be highly motivated and driven. And here are some of the concerns from that White House Council in our country. So compared to girls, boys are more medicated and less educated. Boys have fallen behind girls in reading, writing, motivation, grades, and standardized test scores. For example, by the 8th grade, 41% of girls today are proficient in writing, 41% compared to 20% of boys. By age 12, boys are 60% more likely than girls to have repeated a grade, 60%. Today, 61% of college graduates are females compared to 39% of males. That's interesting. Boys are more likely than girls to have emotional challenges. Now that's interesting. I don't think we would think of it that way, including ADHD, depression, and delinquent behavior. In fact, twice as many boys are diagnosed with ADHD than girls. And of course, the delinquency rate of boys is 3 times that of girls. Boys have an 82% greater risk of developing a learning disability when compared to girls. And between the ages of 15 to 19, the suicide rate among boys is 4 times higher than girls. Now, once again, to kind of bring this into the church just for a minute, Elder Christofferson spoke in General Conference. It was about 20 years now, but this was on his mind. He said, as a psychologist studying the growing phenomenon of what he calls young men stuck in neutral, describes this scenario. Justin goes off to college for a year or two. He wastes thousands of dollars of his parents' money, and then gets bored and comes home to take up residence in his old room, the same bedroom where he lived in high school. Now he's working 16 hours a week at Kinko's part-time or at Starbucks. His parents are pulling their hair out. Justin, you're 26 years old. You're not in school. You don't have a career. You don't even have a girlfriend. What's the plan? What are you going to do with your life? When are you going to get a life? What's the problem? Justin asked. I haven't gotten arrested for anything. I haven't asked you guys for money. Why can't you just chill? And then Elder Christofferson said, how's that for ambition? That's from his talk, Let Us Be Men. And then William J. Bennett, in his book called The Book of Man, said, why are there so many boys and men who are irresponsible, unmotivated, unchivalrous, selfish, and lazy? Why do so many boys and men spend so much time in pointless and soulless activities, inconsiderate of others, absorbed in mindless technology? The question is do similar problems exist among religious boys and men, but also among Latter-day Saint boys and men? And we know that, some of these trends are creeping in to members of the church. I know personally of some young men that went up to college, either BYU or BYU Idaho, and basically flunked out of their freshman year. Why? Because they were up every morning until 3, 4, 5 a.m. playing video games. Young men who are going to college or on missions or even entering marriage, having never worked a day of their lives. We know that there's some of those things out there. Now look what Elder Christofferson said. Brethren, all these trends, he's referring to that. He said, brethren, this cannot be this way with us. As men of the priesthood, we have an essential role to play in society, at home, and in the church. But we must be men that women can trust, and that children can trust, and that God can trust. In the church and kingdom of God in these latter days, we cannot afford to have boys and men who are drifting. We cannot afford young men who lack self-discipline and live only to be entertained. We cannot afford young adult men who are going nowhere in life, who are not serious about forming families and making a real contribution to the world. We cannot afford husbands and fathers who fail to provide spiritual leadership in the home. We cannot afford to have those who exercise the holy priesthood after the order of the Son of God waste their strength in pornography or spend their lives in cyberspace. And then he kind of makes this joke, ironically being of the world while not being in the world. And then he just repeated, brethren, it just cannot be this way with us. Now, just a little bit more data here to make a point. Modern boys are losing ground today in several key areas, and perhaps the area of education is the most significant. In fact, for the first time in our nation's history, boys have less education than their fathers. The pendulum has swung so far in one direction that women are basically surpassing men in just about every academic area. For example, Christina Hoff Sommers, in her article in The Atlantic, The War Against Boys, she said that girls are outshining boys in GPAs, SAT, ACT scores, and in participation in debate clubs, student council, and other extracurricular activities. Meanwhile, boys lead the way in dropout rate, school suspensions, ADHD diagnosis, and poor grade performance. Now another one in the Journal of Gender Issues, and this is quoted by Hannah Rosen in her book, The End of Men and the Rise of Women. She said boys are also less prepared when they arrive at school. Over 30% of boys report coming to school without doing their homework, compared to 21% of girls, 30 to 21. No wonder that the National Honor Society, 64% of the members of that society are female, compared to 36 who are male. Contemporary women place a high value on education today, while men don't seem to be as concerned. In fact, a University of Michigan study found that 67% of female high school seniors planned on graduating from college, compared to only 55% of males who had the same goal. When it comes to education, women are dominating the field today. In fact, women are earning 60% today of all bachelor's degrees, 60% of all master's degrees, and 50% of all law and medical degrees. In 2009, for the first time in our nation's history, more women earned PhDs than men. And these trends aren't necessarily bad. We want to remind everyone of that. In fact, we applaud women for their educational and professional successes. But the question is, but what happened to the men? Where did they go? According to the American Academy of Pediatrics, they said that children now spend more time engrossed in media than they actually do in school. We know that this would be for a lot of boys, a lot of young men. The Academy concluded that American children actually spend more time in media-related activities than they do sleeping. According to a recent report in the Pew Research Center, 99% of boys today play video games. That's pretty much everyone. Nearly 1/3 of those teen gamers play every day, and 34% of boys play longer than 2 hours a day. In fact, over 65% of teens who play video games daily are boys, compared to 35% who are girls. And those games that boys play are often quite violent, much more violent than the games girls would engage in. Jane McGonigal, the director of game research and development at the Institution for the Future in Palo Alto, California, estimates that the average young person will spend 10,000 hours gaming by the time they reach the age of 21. Now, you heard it again, 10,000 hours. To put that in perspective, it takes 4,800 hours to earn a bachelor's degree. The amount of time our young men are spending in video games is double that of a college degree. Back to this idea of video games, and then our college students that are basically dropping out, withdrawing from classes, and even in some cases being put on academic probation for their grades, and then only to find out it's because they're addicted to video games and they're playing all day and all night long. But where do parents fit into this? At over $400 a pop for a video game, and maybe the average is now more closer to the $1,000 range. There's probably not a lot of male high school freshmen that are buying those games. And then you think, okay, who was the parent who said to their child leaving for college, hey, don't forget to bring your Xbox or your PlayStation, right? According to a Pew Research study, 89% of parents recognize that their children do play video games. Okay, that's about 90%. But only 48% of parents with children in the 15 to 16-year-old range actually monitor their children's gaming, and only 37% of parents admit to having ever stopped their child from playing a video game. So there was a little bit about video games. What about pornography? We know that pornography is having a huge negative impact on so many of our men and young men today. Renowned pediatrician Meg Meeker. By the way, every book that Meg Meeker writes, just get it. They're all incredible. She combines great research with stories and experiences. It's good stuff. But she said every boy over the age of 8 in the United States is under sexual assault. And one of the things she's talking about is the pornography epidemic. Pornhub is one of those millions of companies that generates online pornography every day. 15 billion views a year, 1.68 million views every hour for the entire year. In 1985, 92% of adult males had viewed a pornographic magazine by the age of 15. Today, with the internet, the average boy's first exposure to pornography is age 11. And by the way, I think one of the great deceptions out there is what boys are actually viewing. I think if you're stuck in the era that we grew up in, when there were visual, obviously images that people looked at. It's not images anymore. This is video. And this is video at some of the most horrific sexual scenes you could ever imagine. What's being imprinted on their brains is just crazy, crazy, kooky stuff. So with that, that's just kind of the introduction today of, okay, what in the world's going on with our boys and our young men? And so now I bring in my son, Brandon, my only son. I'm proud of him. Brandon's had a great, successful career academically, athletically. In fact, he led one of the greatest highly rated defenses in BYU history. He's now today a successful guy in the business world. But to me, most important is he's a great dad, he's a great husband, and he takes those roles seriously. In fact, he's engineered his whole career so that he could be with his children as often as he possibly can be. He coaches their teams. He's with those kids every day. He's teaching them great things. I love watching him teach his sons how to do things. They're building things together in the backyard. They're always working together as a team. He's a great father teaching his sons skills. One of the great things about Brandon is he holds people accountable. He holds his kids accountable. In fact, he just coached his son Luke and their football team just last fall to the championship. That team was so disciplined. They just did such a great job. It was fun to watch Brandon in that role, as I could remember easily coaching his teams and realize, wow, I didn't know anything compared to what my son knows about coaching. But anyway, Brandon, I'm so glad that you've come on our podcast today. We've talked about doing this for a while, and we found some time to do it, so here we go. So, Brando, welcome. Glad you're here.
Thanks.
Thanks for coming. You'll learn that Brandon's a man of many words. So what I'm hoping is that for every question I ask you, you'll just give a one-word answer. All right, you ready for this?
Yep.
Okay, so Brando, you've been in sports your whole life. You've coached a lot of teams. You guys had a great, successful year this year. But my point is, because of the 4 boys you have at your home, you have a lot of boys. You have a lot of interactions with young men, especially friends of your own kids. And so just what do you see? I mean, what do you see that's going on today with our young men and boys?
I mean, I might have a different perspective than a lot of people just because I feel like I'm kind of close to the action. But I mean, I'm overall pretty impressed with, especially my sons and their friends and the kids their age. They're probably very similar to all the other generations of boys that have ever grown up. Like, they have the same interests, and I definitely think the time that they're living in is probably more difficult than it has been on previous generations, which we'll probably talk about that a little bit. But no, like, my overall assessment is that they're the same as I was when I was a kid, and probably the same as your generation when you were a kid.
In a lot of ways, right? They've just got a phone in front of them now that kind of changes a lot of things. But aside from that, you would say, yeah, no, they're pretty boys are still boys.
I mean, even something like that, though, like, I don't blame any 13-year-old for having a phone. Like, yeah. I don't think that's their fault. Like, the 13-year-old that has a phone in front of them 24/7, I think you have to look at who's responsible for that kid. The 13-year-old, if you give him a phone, he'll say, cool, this is sick,
They're not going to say, no, Dad, take it back.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, so you're saying that if there is a problem today, it may be more of a parenting problem than actually a boy problem.
I mean, I think there's massive societal problems. Like I said, I think it's a difficult time to be a kid. but yeah, by and large, I mean, these kids, they work hard, they're cool, they're funny, they're happy.
Yeah.
And I realize that I'm not around, probably the majority of the kids. There's the kids who, especially the ones who I coach in football, I would say they're good kids, and they work hard. But yeah, if you take the general population of the entire school that my kid goes to, you could probably get a little deeper in the weeds.
Yeah, no, we could. And so you think of this team of boys that you coach right now that are what, 6th and 7th grade?
I mean, Luke is a 7th going into 8th grade. So
yeah, so kind of middle school age.
Yeah.
And so you look back on your days in McKinney, Texas, playing sports and being on teams. Is this what you're saying, is that, Yeah, kind of the same type of thing. Same kind of. You had some lazy kids. You had some kids who worked hard. You had kids that were tough. Kids that weren't so tough. About the same brand all the way across.
You see all of it, but like, I mean, the stuff, I mean, like, for example, here, like, these kids, like you said, some are lazier than others, but they all want the same thing out of sports, which is, the camaraderie, and they want it to be fun. They want to win. And I think for the most part, like, the fun part is they get to be together at practice for 2 hours a day with their buddies,
Yeah.
which is, it's what makes it fun.
Yeah. No, that's great. All right, Brandon, from being with your own sons and then once again just being with this group of boys that you coach, what do you think what do you see as some of the dangers that are threatening our boys today?
I mean, you mentioned phones already. I think having a smartphone is probably not a good idea for a 13-year-old. I mean, I can't think of like what I'd be doing on a phone all day, if I had a phone with me in 7th grade. So I think, and it's sad, like when I see kids that are in 7th grade playing on their phone, I'm just like, I feel bad for that kid, because I'm like, dude, you have, you as a 13, 14-year-old kid, you have unlimited energy. Like, you could literally be conquering the world right now, doing whatever you want to do.
Chopping down a tree in your backyard.
Yeah, and you're choosing to spend your time on a phone. Like, to me, that's let alone like the aspect of like pornography and that stuff. But I think a lot of them do kind of experience life through social media, and which is like at such a young age, it's like your social interactions are like, it's easier as a 13-year-old than ever to make your social interactions live, like playing with your friends and stuff. So I think that's a big danger. I think the world around these kids is designed in a tough way. Like, you're asking these kids to go sit in school for 7-8 hours a day, and to me, when I remember being in school, it felt like being in jail. Like, literally, like you're sitting down in a classroom with fluorescent lights over your head, like
and no windows and cinder block.
Yeah, when whatever you're learning is, probably not that interesting to you. You'd rather be doing something else. And I just think like that's the part of me where I'm like, that's why it's so fun to coach football. It's because it's like literally coming out of school, these kids feel like they're getting out of jail.
Yeah.
They're on release time or whatever. So
they're on work release.
Yeah.
Brand, there's been a lot of, as you kind of talk about that, there's been a lot of books that have been written on how our education system today doesn't favor boys at all. That boys would learn in much better ways. So I think you're onto something as you share that.
Well, I think in school there's like this built-in repression of masculine energy.
Mm-hmm.
All the administrators, all the teachers are probably women, and
majority for sure.
Like and you probably cited the Christina Hoff Sommers book, which that's like the war against boys.
Oh, the war against boys. Yeah,
I would recommend it to anyone who has sons. It goes into depth about how schools are structured, for the benefit of girls.
Yeah,
just by the way that social interactions are structured, and boys, I think they grow up in this with sort of like an aura of disapproval, where it's like it's much easier for a little girl to sit in her desk at class and listen to the teacher and not be disruptive. And I just think like if you're a young kid, you end up getting in trouble when it's not even inherently something that's inside your control. Like you want to play, you want to be active, you want to be moving around. Like even I have a first grader. When he comes home from school, I can tell it's just like dispiriting,
Yeah. Like he's just all the air's been let out of his sails.
Also, I remember in elementary school having like 3 recesses a day.
Yeah.
You'd have one in the morning, you'd have one after lunch, and you had an afternoon recess. These kids have 30 minutes after lunch. That's their only recess.
Yeah.
So it's just tough. It honestly makes me feel compassion, like for the way that they're, growing up. The other thing too is like she talks about in that book how boys need to have like unstructured free play. And, like me and my friends, like, of course we got into trouble and stuff and we did mischievous things, but that's healthy and good, I think, for kids. And
that's how you learn things, right?
And if you think about it, like what second of the day do these kids have that's unstructured and unsupervised? Like they're always, even if they're off at the park playing with their friends, they're leashed on a cell phone. Their parents can call them any minute and like see what's going on, you know?
Yeah.
Which like there's advantages to that, but at the same time, like I'm really sad for this age of kids that they don't get to just be unsupervised playing,
just roaming through the fields.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of what being a kid's about, I feel like.
Brad, when you said that, it brought my memory back. I still remember, even though as old as I am, I still remember high school very vividly. And I still remember in my senior year in high school, sitting, we had tables like the one we're at, where two of you sat at a table. And I was sitting next to this guy named Richard, and he goes, "You know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to flip this table over in the middle of class." And I was like, "Nah, you wouldn't do that." And he said, "Oh yeah, watch this." And he just stood up and roared like a lion and just flipped the table over. And of course, we both got sent to the office because I was laughing at him. But, you know, once again, there's that pent-up energy I think that you're talking about. That I remember another time we got busted for, we had taken all the high jump mats, you know, from the pole vault pit, pulled them over to the top of this, you know, below the top of the stadium. We were jumping off like lemmings.
Yeah.
It was like 40 or 50 feet, which, you know what, that's what boys are kind of designed to do, is take some risk and do some stupid stuff, and that's how you learn. But the energy that you're talking about, I think, is, and I know from your day when you were in high school, you had some of that energy too.
Well, I just remember even back in elementary school, like we would, at recess, me and my friends, we'd go to the furthest field, like in the, you know, in the school area, and we'd play football or soccer or whatever. And, you know, some days there'd be a fight, and most of the time we got along. But I just, like, being outside of like the field of view of like the recess aides and the teachers, there was at least like an element of built-in freedom to it.
Yeah.
And like now I hear from my elementary age son, who they're not allowed to play soccer, they're not allowed to play football anymore at recess because someone got hit in the head with a ball, or, you know, someone fell down and scraped their elbow. So hopefully that's something. I mean, I don't think a lot of people are talking about that.
Right.
That's why I think that's such a good book to read, is War Against Boys by Christina Hoff Sommers.
Yeah, I think that's a great book. And once again, you know, what can parents do as you're talking about that? And certainly a lot of that can start, at least, I mean, if we can't control what goes on in the school, we can certainly control what goes on in our own homes. And I'm sure when your boys get home, they're going to be free ranging for a while.
Oh yeah. I mean, I think elemental, you know,
Yeah.
like I think they need to be outside playing and getting hurt, and like you
expending
said,
their energy.
That's how you learn. You know, if I fall out of a tree, hopefully the next time I'm up in a tree, I figure it out better and don't fall out of it. You know,
you hang on with two hands.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Brandon, I think that's a great spot you're in right now as you're talking about kind of once these boys get home. What is it? What are some things you see parents doing that are probably not so great, but also what could parents do that could be better to help these boys reach their potential?
I think the biggest thing with boys is I think there's two major things that I see that I think have helped my kids. And one of them is just having goals. Like you need to, like we talked about it actually the other day, like you need to have short-term goals. You know, what are you going to do this month and this year? But talking about like, where do you see yourself in 2 years and 5 years and 10 years? You know, my 13-year-old in 10 years from now will be 23, and kind of his pathway in life by that point will be basically decided, you know? Like, you don't change, at least in my experience, like too much after you're 23 years old. Like, you kind of are who you are at that point. And so it's like, okay, dude, what goals do you have? Like, where do you see yourself? And then, you know, like, how can I help as a parent? How can I help you get there? Like, what do we need to do better at? And I think every kid's going to have different goals, but I see a lot today where, you know, I think if you were to ask the majority of kids, where do you see yourself in 5 or 10 years, they probably wouldn't know what to tell you.
Yeah.
You know? Like, so I think just having some type of a plan, some type of a roadmap,
I think that's great.
Is critical. And then the other one is I think it's so important to have good role models, you know? Like, I look back to when I was like a teenager, I feel like I had a lot of good people that I looked up to and wanted to be like and wanted to model. And that's like the main thing that I worry about for kids is like, if you just look at media and look at who the kids are surrounded by and, you know, movies, entertainment, all the pop culture that they are inundated with. Like, who are
they looking up to?
Yeah, who are the good role models that can model healthy masculine behavior?
What real manhood is.
So as a parent, I think that's obviously job 1A, you know, is to model good, righteous behavior for your kids. And then what I try to do is when I do see good examples or positive role models, whether it be in wherever it may be, you just try to point them out and say, dude, you look at this dude, you need to be like that.
Pay attention to what he's doing.
Yeah.
Brando, that's awesome. So let's talk really specifically then, as you're talking about this role model idea, about just dads, you know, because I will say, Brandon, for me, you know, kind of growing up, not as a member of the church, whenever we would go visit these churches, these different churches, that was one of the things that I just couldn't connect with is the men that were religious. It was almost kind of weird. You know what I mean? It was just kind of a weirdness. When I came into the church, one of the things that felt really good to me was that religion with men was modeled in such a good, normal, it was just normalized. It was just normal and healthy. So I'm grateful for that influence of the church, but maybe more specifically, what about a dad? I mean, I know you've kind of addressed that in a way, but is there anything else specific besides example, goals? What's a dad's role in helping his sons become, you know, good, righteous men?
Well, I think you have to obviously teach, you know, like I see that as one of my primary roles is to, whatever the kids are learning from the gospel, like it's going to come from me. So I think teaching kids, because they don't know what they don't know. So you have to, you know, obviously actively teach them. I think a bigger measure of that is like your example. It's one thing, you know, you can teach all you want if you're not an exemplar or trying to be of the values that you're trying to teach, it's obviously going to ring hollow, you know?
Yeah.
I think, like, outside of gospel terms, I think it's another role that a father plays that no one else can really fill is to, like, I view my job is to prepare my sons as best as I can for reality, which is, you know, once you're a big boy, like, here's what's staring you in the face, you know, the world is a cold place and it's tough to make it, you know, and
right.
Tougher than ever to make it, actually. And so, like, introducing that reality to them, you know, like, dude, this is what real life is going to be, and my job is to help make sure you're ready for it, you know?
Versus coddling or protecting or things like that.
I do think if that's, you know, going back to your last question of what role do parents play, I see, you know, the motherly influence is to nurture and, you know, if you want to say coddle, be protective. And I do think there's probably too much of that. I think if anything, these kids are, you know, they might be a little over coddled and protected too much from kind of the harsh realities of life that are awaiting them.
Yeah.
When they leave home, maybe.
So, Brando, this is a good transition to kind of our last question. Number one, we as parents, you know, and hopefully influencing you, wanted our kids to be the hardest workers, and we wanted them to be tough. And I've totally loved watching you pass those traits down to your kids. I released a missionary couple last night. I was talking to them. They're doctors. He's a doctor. And I just said, what did you deal with the most? You know, his job was, as a doctor, he was more like a consultant over like all the missions in the Midwestern U.S., you know. So whenever there was a medical issue, he was called in. Well, most of the medical issues, when I was a missionary, the medical issues were you broke your foot or your ankle playing basketball on P-Day. That doesn't happen anymore. Now the medical issues are all mental health, you know. And he said number one issue that we probably dealt with was anxiety. And so that, I think, speaks a little bit to your concern about maybe our young people are being coddled a little bit much and we're not helping them develop the grit and resilience that they need today. Because like you just said, the world is tough and you're trying to get your boys prepared for that. So anything dads can do, moms and dads can do to help our children develop those great values of grit and resilience.
Well, I think if, as a missionary, you're struggling with anxiety, I think a large part of that comes from, like, is this the hardest thing you've ever done? And if serving a mission is the hardest thing you've ever done, then you probably will have anxiety.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? like serving and being a missionary is not hard. Like, it was fun, and yeah, there was like challenges, but to me it was it was fun, you know.
Yeah.
And I think if it had been the hardest thing I'd ever done, I probably would have struggled a lot more. But, you know, like, to me, like, training for sports and stuff in Texas, that was obviously very demanding. The hardest thing I did before my mission was I was mowing 10 lawns a day in Dallas, Texas in July.
Right.
Like that was actually really hard, you know, and like somehow I got through it, you know. By the time I was serving a mission, I just, dude, this is awesome. Sleep a lot. I get more sleep than I ever have. I don't have to wake up for early morning seminary. Like
at 5 a.m. and
yeah, like I'm eating good. Like to me, it was pretty, I just thought it was fun. But
by the way, we should tell whoever's listening today that Brandon was in Chile, and I asked him a little while ago, wait, did you guys have earthquakes there all the time? And he was like, yeah, all the time. So I'm like, wait, I don't think I ever heard about one of those, but yeah, you were in an interesting place, in probably a difficult place, but you were prepared for it.
The other thing too is like confidence is the opposite of anxiety.
Yeah.
And how do young boys develop confidence? How does anyone develop confidence? Is you work hard to attain some type of goal or metric, and you hit it, or you don't hit it, but you put in the work and you've seen improvement, and that reinforces your confidence. Like I tell the kids I coach, like, dude, we're confident going into this game because of how hard you guys have practiced all week, you know? Win or lose or whatever the scoreboard says at the end, like you guys are improving, you're getting better, and there's confidence that comes with accomplishment. And so it's me, like the kids on their mission struggling with anxiety, I think it just begs the question, like, what did life look like before this?
Right.
List off your accomplishments. What have you achieved? And if it's video game related, you know, or whatever,
right,
then that probably wasn't a significant enough achievement to prepare them to, you know, to be in the real world and deal with hard things.
Brando, one of my favorite recent memories of you was watching your championship game that you guys were playing, this football team of middle school kids. And you just talked about confidence. And one of the things that you were telling them at halftime is how prepared they were just physically. The conditioning that you guys had done, they were so prepared physically. And the other team, you kept noticing that the other team was exhausted, right? They were fully exhausted. It was obvious they weren't in the same type of shape that you guys were in. And it was just kind of fun to watch how you instilled that confidence in those kids of kind of helping them understand, guys, you are in such great physical condition right now. That's why you're going to win this game.
Yeah, I mean, that's, like I said, like, obviously I think sports are a great way to develop that. And it's not the only way. It's kind of what I'm involved in, so that's the lens I see it through. But anytime if you've put in the work or you've put in the preparation for, you know, whatever it is, you know, we're talking about missions. So if you've actively prepared and, you know, strengthened those muscles that you need to be successful in whatever endeavor, I think that eliminates anxiety and fear and doubt, you know. And in football, that's what allows you to perform your best, is you know you're ready for it.
Yeah. No, that's great. Okay, everyone. Well, thank you, Brandon. Thank you for being with us today. I think these are some great ideas, great things to think about. I love your thoughts on anxiety and confidence and how that works. But really, if we're talking about let's do something, I love your suggestion about sitting down with your sons, and I'm sure with any of our children, and let's make a plan. Let's make a roadmap. Let's help them identify the things that they need to do to get to where they want to be. I think that's a great suggestion. So, everyone, thanks for listening in. Grateful for your participation. And once again, Brandon, thank you for being with us today. And we look forward to being with you next time.